It's my pleasure to welcome Caitlin Ahrens to the library this evening. Caitlin is currently working on her Ph.D. in space and planetary science at the University of Arkansas. She helped plan and build the Pluto Laboratory at the Arkansas Center for Planetary Simulations, and she now manages the Pluto Lab. Caitlin has received a patent on earthquake forecasting methodology, which has won many prestigious awards. In addition to her current research, she is a NASA Solar System ambassador, and she also hosts a show on KUAF called Scratching the Surface. Please help me welcome Caitlin Ahrens.
Alrighty guys, so this is going to be quite the adventure when I was making this presentation for you guys. Whenever the library came to me and they said, hey, we really want a space lecture series. I had done this last spring before, trying to come up with topics that would be interesting, and I was like, you know what? There's actually quite a bit of literature and movies that portray Mars in different ways. Let's see what happens with that. And oh boy, did I go into certain interesting rabbit holes from there. So it ended up being so long of a PowerPoint that I really had to whittle down a lot of slides for you guys. So hopefully it'll still be enjoyable for you guys though, but I want to get just kind of a basic background through the history of our perception of Mars, how much that's actually changed, and then how much the literature and movies have actually just really changed along with our understanding of Mars. And it got interesting. So by all means, there will be some slight spoiler alerts. I'm not going to reveal who done it or anything like that, but there will be some mentions of certain plot points, especially when we talk about the movie The Martian. There will be some plot points in there too, so spoiler alert right now. So there's two specific sections of Mars history. So it's called pre-Mariner. Mariner was our first successful orbiters around Mars, getting our very first images of the dusty red planet. So pre-1965 literature and movies, and then we'll go into post-Mariner after our first understanding of first images of Mars and actually getting data on the surface of Mars. And then our understanding has not entirely shifted, actually. Just our understanding has. So really, really basic beginnings here. We truly have the earliest recordings from the Egyptian astronomers, 2nd millennium BCE. This is astounding. We finally have actually recordings of Mars, whether it's through hieroglyphics or certainly through ancient writings as well. The Babylonians have had the timing and geometric positioning, so they knew exactly when it was going to be in the sky at certain seasons and certain dates. The thing about planets is that it's not going to occur at the same place every single day. No, it is very much seasonal. So Mars is usually up highest in the night sky around the summer months. So they actually figured out all the math, which was really cool. The period in motion was Tang Dynasty, which is really interesting. But the Greeks were still weirded out about, well, hang on, the Earth is the center of the universe. How is Mars going around us? It doesn't make sense. And then finally, all the way from BCE time all the way to 1543, thank you, Copernicus, with the heliocentric model. So the sun is finally at the center of our solar system, and all the pretty planets go around the sun from there. Still a long time ago here, we finally have Galileo. He finally had one of the very early models of a telescope. Some of his telescopes, or at least models of his telescopes, are usually found in museums around the nation. Definitely go to telescope museums. There are out there. My favorite is at the Adler Planetarium out in Chicago. They have a beautiful display of old telescopes and how they were made and how was the glass grounded up. It was really quite pretty. So through the 1600s, all the way up to 1877, we finally got enough of geologic reports, which is basically you get a sphere, what's dark and what's light. that was our basic geologic understanding. Ooh, what a predicament. So these were the early maps that we had. So essentially it was truly what was black speckled and what was light colored. And finally, we got to this. This was from Percival Lowell, who also then now has the Lowell Observatory out in Arizona, Flagstaff, Arizona. So there for a while, we had, again, it was just a bunch of dark spots versus white spots, but notice all of the lines crisscrossing all over the place. There for the longest time, we were like, oh, there may not be people here anymore, but these look like Italian canals. Okay, so there's boats on Mars, ancient boats, ancient canals, which means there must have been some sort of civilization, oh my goodness, to create this kind of map. Funny thing about this particular map, you know how you stare at a light bulb for too long, you start to kind of see some veins in your eyes? Yeah, turns out all of this is from the eyesight of Percival Lowell. So in reality, there are no canals. He just stared at the telescope for way too long after a while. So now bringing into late 1800s, pretty much the beginning of where Mars comes into play with literature. Now, science fiction has actually been around since ancient Egypt and actually ancient Chinese folklore. And that's actually a whole really fun realm to get into, especially Japanese culture. Japanese culture has actually had a lot of really interesting poetry from like 2nd century, where you would have like moon princesses and intergalactic war. So, sorry, Star Wars, the Japanese pretty much beat you by several centuries. But as far as when did Mars become a plot point or a setting or an environment for some sort of science fiction stories? So here's a few of them. My personal favorite is Mr. Stranger's Sealed Packets, where you would have almost borderline astrobiology being involved. Melbourne and Mars is interesting too. You would have a main character on Earth, have a mental link with a being on Mars, and it would switch back and forth between how they live their lives, almost similar but a little bit differently as well. So you get almost to a utopia sense that Mars might be better than Earth. It's a sanctuary. They live better there. They breathe better there. Their lives are much more peaceful there. So Mars was essentially a utopia for quite a while, until we get War of 1870. So you get into almost between the Prussians defeating the French in 1870, there was this huge rise of fear of technology. Now, granted, it's not the technological warfare that we can have in this present day, but essentially artillery technology, the advancement of weaponry. So it went into this huge ordeal throughout Europe, mainly also through British imperialism, where you now have what's called the invasion literature boom. So right into the late 1890s. So Mars is no longer a happy utopia anymore. It's now Martians are now hostile. Martians now have the upper hand on us. They have the more technology. They have the the big guns, basically. So now you get into the War of the Worlds era. Thank you, H.G. Wells. And certainly all of these. This one's pretty funny, Honeymoon in Space. You actually have a honeymoon couple going to their honeymoon on Mars, and then they get kidnapped and pretty much have strange adventures on Martians and whatnot. So, and they have to escape Mars. And that was essentially the plot point for a lot of this. Now, War of the Worlds, you have Martians invading southern England. So that's a different scenario. But Martians are essentially seen as they are the hostile ones. Then there was actually a really pretty interesting period from 1908, 1930s. You then get either Mars is now a safe haven for socialist empire or a safe haven for communist empires. Okay, gee, I wonder where this time period is going into. Aelita is actually Alexei Tolstoy, who is Leo Tolstoy's second cousin. So he mainly wrote science fiction. Aelita is an interesting read, though. Most of it is in Russian, so good luck trying to find an English transcript of that. Cat Country is the Chinese bringing about their socialism. So very interesting switch in all sorts of literature, except for one. We then have 1917 by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is a wonderful read called A Princess of Mars. So this pretty much stood out as its own genre, and this is considered to be one of the very first books to really push forward bringing in what we understand about Mars in that current time and bring it into literature. So there was a little bit of science fact into this piece of fiction, though. So by all means, it's really interesting fiction. It inspired Ray Bradbury, Arthur C. Clarke, and certainly Carl Sagan, which is interesting. Carl Sagan loved this book as a child. So this very much had its own separate genre. It didn't stick to a specific trope at that specific time, but it did utilize those canal maps from Percival Lowell into his writings. So very interesting book. So now we're going to get into the movies now, the silent era, the early 1900s. So Aelita was actually made into a Russian silent film, so there's a clip of it right there, which got interesting. And then certainly the 1918 A Trip to Mars, this is, I believe, Danish. So definitely the silent era movies. There were actually a lot more science fiction movies at the time, especially A Trip to the Moon as well. Everyone seems to know that movie whether they realize it or not, but it's the typical moon face and you have a rocket kind of slamming right into the eyeball of the moon. Whether you've seen that through memes or just through popular culture, that's considered one of the earliest science fiction forms. So right now, though, I just want to talk about films and you having Mars in some way. Then you have the serial era. This is where it gets to be a little bit more creative, a little bit more fun, zany and wacky, having really weird-shaped rockets and whatnot. Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers. It gets interesting from there, the serial era of television. What kind of wacky, crazy adventures would you have on Mars? Tune in next time for Flash Gordon. And then you get the Halloween of 1938. This got really interesting in the turn of science fiction. So this particular quote, "I can see peering out of that black hole 2 luminous disks. Are they eyes?" Anybody know where this is from? What quote this is from? 1938. It was the Orson Welles War of the Worlds radio drama. Now, again, War of the Worlds, you have hostile Martians invading Earth and just basically taking over and terrorizing neighborhoods for an evening. So the fact that this radio drama was being read on Halloween night, of all things, so the book is actually set in England. For the radio drama, they twisted the words to make it real-life street names in New Jersey. So this was being live broadcasted on Halloween night in the suburbs of New York and New Jersey using real street names. It's astounding. If you ever need to listen to it, it's on YouTube. There's CDs you can listen to. It's on iTunes as well. It's scary. But at the time, reading this in 1938, and you're tuning in, and you're hearing mass panic and laser beams on your radio, you're going to have a bit of a panic. And that's exactly what happened, is that This particular radio adaptation scared so many people into chaos going, oh my goodness, there are Martians. Oops. Okay. So what basically had to happen was Orson Welles had to go back onto the radio and apologize for that. And so any dramatic play that involves that kind of horror and science fiction now has to say intermittently through the show, this is a radio drama. This is based off of a book. So this was one of the first chaos. Oh my goodness, there might be beings, there might be Martians. We're under attack. What doesn't help through all of history is now we get Sputnik involved. The first Sputnik 1 launched by the Soviet Union in 1957. So now we're getting into, okay, technology with space. We're not into space race mode yet, but now we're getting into how far can we push our technology, especially with rockets, and unfortunately, they thought Sputnik 1 was a spy satellite at one point. So now you're getting into paranoia land with everybody in the 1950s. So with that mindset of, okay, we can enhance our technology, everybody can enhance our technology, what if Mars is not only hostile, but now they're really intelligent? Okay, some of these, they still have Martians as being slightly hostile now, but now they're just really technologically advanced. What if they are the spies? Okay, so now we're getting into analogies of the Soviet Union spying on American. So now we have the Martians spying on Earth. This one I enjoy. C.S. Lewis, the same author who wrote The Chronicles of Narnia, also wrote actually a whole trilogy based around the setting of Mars. So I love the lakes on Mars. I wish there were lakes on Mars. That'd be great. Phobos, the robot planet, got really interesting. It's a 1955 novel that actually utilizes Phobos, which is one of Mars' tiny little moons, but they use artificial intelligence. The entire moon is actually a whole safe haven of artificial intelligence. It's a thinking robot planet. In this case, it's a moon. Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury is fantastic. I believe a graphic novel has actually just been recently made about the Martian Chronicles. Really well done, beautiful art. And then drifting aside from intelligence and technology, now it's a matter of, well, what if we want to explore Mars? What if we want to live on Mars? And then the other side of that is, how do we survive Mars? What if we get stranded there? How do we survive? So this truly paved the way for a lot of the cinematic universes we have with Mars as well. Most of these I unfortunately have not read. Martian Time Slip is really good by Philip K. Dick. So Philip wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the book that then led the way for the Blade Runner movies. So just to kind of give you a nice little crossover, that same guy for Blade Runner, if you enjoy those movies. So going into 1950s cinema, we then have the visitor era, whether we become the visitors on Mars and we're considered the aliens and Mars is trying to protect itself, or we try to mess with life in some way. We try to oh no, there's monsters on Mars, kill it. It's like, well, wait a moment, hang on. We're the aliens on the planet, leave them alone and go back to Earth. But nah, that would be the smart choice. Let's just kill the random bat spiders that inhabit Mars. Hey! These are actually really cute, by the way. If you are to see Angry Red Planet, I call them cute for the cinemagic of that whole movie. So just to give it into perspective, this particular movie has nothing to do with Mars, but to give a perspective of The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is considered to be one of the main classics of science fiction movies, mainly because of this visitor era. So just to give a perspective of this being the highly acclaimed movie to bring about this entire visitor era going on. But I do highly recommend Angry Red Planet. You could still find it on Amazon. 1960s then just got really weird. Technology went out the window, intelligence went out the window. They were more concerned about Technicolor. We wanted everything to be colorful and bright and not quite 3D, but they're really trying. Let's just try to figure out all the cool cinematic magic we can do in the 1960s. So this is called the spacesuit era. How crazy can we be with our costuming and our colors and our settings? This is interesting. Santa Claus conquers the Martians. Yes, and that is the movie poster in all of its glory. So quick synopsis is that Martian kids were jealous of Earthling kids for having a Santa Claus, and gosh darn, we want a Santa Claus too, so they kidnap Santa Claus, bring him to Mars. So Earthling kids have to band together, build a rocket, ship themselves out to Mars, and rescue Santa. Wizard of Mars, I have never seen. I really want to, especially when its movie poster looks like this. And John Carradine. I am a fan of John Carradine as the wizard of all things. So I like this part too. A girl and 3 men face horrors of Mars. That's very descriptive. Thank you, fantastic space age shock show. So thank you, 1960s. Meanwhile, 1960s also really brought about NASA's, at least upbringing of achievements. So NASA is still very much a baby administration at this point. It was developed in the late 1950s, and so this was finally NASA bringing up the charge of, okay, we can send astronauts to orbit Earth now. We can finally have a space program going on. We can have the Apollo program, which is pretty much a mashup of the Mercury projects and the Gemini projects, bring them together to have the grand program of the Apollo program. And finally, Apollo 11, 1969, which its anniversary is coming up. The 50th anniversary is coming up. Yay! So finally, 1965 to present, we can get into post-Mariner. So Mariner 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Whether you want to know where the other numbers went, they either went in a different direction or they didn't get there at all. We missed a few times. But there are flybys. So a flyby, compared to a flyby in orbiter, a flyby is basically where you have a target and you run as fast as you can and take a bunch of pictures and just keep going. That's a flyby. An orbiter is you have a target and you get there and then you try to circle it as many times around and around and around until you either just die in the atmosphere or you crash land. And it's mainly crash land when you run out of fuel. But the Mariner programs finally gave us our first actual images of Mars. Hooray. And debunked the whole canal scenario. So not exactly good resolution to make a map, however. They did miss a few areas on Mars, and it was very fuzzy of resolution. So at least we're like, yay, there's a photograph, there's a surface, and that's about it. And it's all black and white, so we didn't even know about color at the time either. Finally, we had the Viking landers. So this was the first landers on Mars, 1975. The first images of Olympus Mons. So Olympus Mons is the solar system's largest volcano. Big honking volcano. So these were at least the first images we got of this gigantic volcano right next door to us. And actually had some of the first biology experiments. So they were able to do a little bit of chemistry experiments. They did find oxidation. So which means, okay, there's a bunch of iron on Mars. That's why it's red. It rusts. Mars Global Surveyor, I have a personal connection with because I actually had done a lot of the composition work from Mars Global Surveyor, so I'm biased whenever people ask me what's my favorite Mars mission. It's like, I'm always going to pick Mars Global Surveyor. Unfortunately, it has ended since 2006, but there's still lots of data that we still play with. and whatnot, but it really gave us a huge jump between, let's take a picture of this one tiny area that's really fuzzy, and it might be something on Mars, to, okay, we can do topography, we can do composition, we can do field maps, we can do future landing sites. Oh, look, there's dust cycles, there's dust storms on Mars. It just had a huge swath of stuff. So it's an orbiter, it never had a lander or anything, but gave us a lot to work with. So from there, this was actually the cookie cutter for us of how to improve later missions. So then we had Pathfinder and Sojourner. These little tiny rovers, these are our very first rovers on Mars. These little guys are so cute. These are actually only barely the size of a poodle. Is actually the size. So they're actually really quite tiny, size of small dogs. They didn't go terribly far, but at least they went. They rovered like they were supposed to. So they did quite a bit of soil and rock, wind data for once too. So really tiny, cute little rovers, really cute. 2001 Odyssey, it's actually still going around. It has helped us map at least hydrogen, which means, is there water? We have better techniques now to figure out if there's water on Mars now, but at the time, at least in 2001, it's like, oh, let's map hydrogen. Why not? We've learned a little bit more about hydrogen since then, especially with radiation. Radiation is still a huge problem with sending people to Mars. Mars Express is still going around as well. It's been there since 2003. It did have a lander, Beagle 2, but I believe Beagle 2 is no longer operational. But we still use Omega and HRSC, which is a pretty good camera. Not the highest definition camera we have, but it's a pretty good camera. Omega is a French mineral imaging system, so it's given us quite a bit of interesting stuff. Finally, Spirit and Opportunity. Unfortunately, they both died. Yeah.
How close to the surface do they go to get these images?
It depends. The earliest ones didn't go that very close. Oh, gotcha. This one? Yeah, this Mars Express is actually fairly close. It's a little bit closer than the moons of Mars, so still say quite a few kilometers up though. So it wants to go through cloud layers, basically, that were cloud layers, itty bitty clouds, very, very thin clouds. So practically what the first cloud layer would be here on Earth. I don't know the exact number, but fairly close. This is not too far away. We're getting closer and closer and closer to the surface without crashing, hopefully. Yeah, so back to Spirit and Opportunity. So now we're getting a little bit more adventurous with these rovers. These are not the size of poodles. These are now, I'm 5'8", and I can stare into the eyes of the rover. So we've gone from toy poodle size to now average human height size of rovers. So having to land something that large was already going to be a feat in itself. And it landed fine, and they lasted much longer than their battery life, by all means. So unfortunately, they have both died in actually interesting ways, both by dust, but at different times. So Spirit died in 2010. What happened is that one of its tires actually got stuck in a sand pile. It was just kind of roving along, and then its tire got stuck. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I could still take pictures. So I'm just going to go around in circles and circles and circles, and then it got both of its front wheels stuck, in the sand pile, and then I was like, okay, I'll just keep taking pictures of the one piece of sky I can look at for the rest of my days. And then it died. And then, unfortunately, Opportunity just died very recently. How many of you guys have heard about the Opportunity rover? It's been in the news every once in a while. I have a lot of friends, there's still a lot of collaborators in Mars, and I still work on Mars data. There were a lot of us crying that day. It was very, very sad. So there is actually not to make you cry or anything, but there's actually a coding system where if we can no longer communicate to the rover, we then give it a code to wake itself up. And for us to know when it wakes up, it's supposed to sing us a song. So we gave it a playlist. We gave it over 500 songs, so that way we can at least, hopefully, it'll just keep playing a certain song as it's going through time. Unfortunately, I never made it to song number 500 through the playlist. I think it barely got to song 70. Different songs kind of deal, like I like wake up, very exercisey kind of songs or something, or just very sad. And it never sang itself awake. And it's supposed to sing itself happy birthday too. Never sang itself happy birthday. So very sad. It got trapped in a huge dust storm, and it just completely just got covered in sand. So that's the problem with this design. As wonderful of a design as it was for the time, it cannot last because these are solar panels. So you get dust on top of those solar panels, it's done. There's not going to be some alien with a dust broom and go, here you go, little guy, as much as we wanted that. No. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is amazing. This thing is a monster. This thing is the camera. That's how big this camera is. Who would want a camera like that, right? Woo. You can see forever for that. So this is our highest definition camera we have to date. This thing is monstrous. It's still going around. You can actually see the images update online for free, so it's completely publicly available. I'm happy to give you the link after the talk here. But it can go down to 30 centimeters per pixel. This is outstanding as far as picture resolution go, because you would get this fairly large image pop up on your screen, and then you can just keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in and zooming in, and it's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Mars Phoenix, unfortunately, this one didn't last very long though, but this particular mission had a lot to do with trying to verify water ice, so at least subsurface-wise, there's not water on the surface of Mars, but how about underneath? And there is. The Curiosity rover, it's still going. We have improved our design. So the size of this puppy, you go from toy poodle with Sojourner and Pathfinder to my height with Spirit and Opportunity. Curiosity is the size of a small car. Much bigger now. Much bigger. So the ultimate geologist is also what we call it. It has lasers. It has much bigger tires as well. It has a scooping mechanism where it would scoop up dirt and pretty much eat it, and then it would digest it. Yeah, it gets kind of freaky, but it will eat the dirt, and then there's lasers inside of its stomach, and it will actually zap the soil with little itty-bitty lasers. And as you're zapping soil and rock, what happens is that laser is so hot, little tiny vapors and plasmas will kind of rise out. You shoot another laser at the plasma, and it will tell you the composition of whatever that soil and rock is. Same thing with why there's a laser that will shoot out, and then it will actually analyze the little tiny vapors that will slowly sizzle out of the rock as well. It has a drill, so it will drill a hole and then look and then shoot a laser inside the hole. There's a lot of lasers going on, so it gets interesting. But as big as this rover is, it does not go that fast. It will barely reach a foot per day. It goes incredibly slow. Now you might be saying, oh, but there's all sorts of stuff on the news, and look what Curiosity found here and here and here. It's like, yeah, but keep in mind is that it will move a foot, do all the lasers and drills in that one spot. Let's do it again. And that takes at least a day, at least, if not a couple days. And it may just stay in that one spot and then move. So it's still working. Luckily, the design has actually been much better. It's actually radioactive. All right, so we no longer have to deal with solar panels anymore. We don't have to worry about being completely covered by dust. It likes dust. It doesn't matter anymore. It's completely nuclear inside of it. It actually took pictures during the huge dust storm that destroyed the Opportunity rover. And it pretty much just took pictures like, oh, the sun's gone. It's dark. Cool, I'm going back to lasering rocks. That was fine. We didn't drive it because we actually couldn't see for quite a while. The dust was so heavy and hung in the air, it completely blackened out the sun for a while. So we just let curiosity just stay put and just keep lasering rocks around it. Like, well, I'm stuck here now. Pew, pew. So back to this particular map where we've had this for the longest time. Finally, in 2011, we then had our best geologic map made. So very much an improvement from wrong canals to every single color you see on this map is a different geology. All right. So as a geologist, I see these kinds of maps practically daily. So these are just like, oh, yay. What kind of fun stuff can we deal with? So most of the holes here are craters. This is Hellas Basin here. You have Valles Marineris. You have the Tharsis volcanoes here. Olympus Mons is right there. All of this pink stuff is lava. All the black lines here are actually giant faults just ripping into the surface from those volcanoes. You have another tiny sister volcano over here called Elysium. You have all the volcanic ice plains in green around the area. It's just gorgeous. There's so much geology to be had on Mars, so there's still so much to be done. So our understanding of Mars going from very fuzzy images and it's red and dusty and cold and icy to now just a huge haven for geologists and chemists and biologists and everybody, and engineers. What kind of rovers can we build next? So by all means, our understanding has certainly increased, but in terms of cinema, however, we still want to have a little bit of fun with our cinema. Whether we understand Mars presently, we still have a little bit of fun. So there's 6 main categories that you can group most of these movies in some fashion. Natural hazards, psychology of being stranded on Mars, the repair and rescue mission, the first trip, or you're wanting to colonize Mars, or life comes here, or we go there and we mess with life. And quite frankly, you can use the same categories for almost every science fiction space-related movie. It's the same thing. It's the same categories. So for Mars in particular, natural or biological disasters, I personally love Rocket Man. It's a fantastic Disney movie from 1997. But they have a big dust storm for that particular movie, Species 2. You have a particular biological disaster with the setting on Mars as well. And then The Martian, you're going to see The Martian in several categories. Most of these movies will be in several categories. The stranded psychology, you certainly have The Martian. He's stranded on Mars. Okay. But here's the interesting part. The whole stranded psychology goes 2 different ways. You either have, like Stranded, and Red Planet, you're stuck on Mars and it's immediate panic. We got to get out of here. We're in danger. Oh my goodness, we're on another planet. Comms are down. What are we going to do? Blah. Whereas you have The Martian. You're stuck on a planet. No one's around you. Comms are down. What are you going to do? Instead of going, oh my goodness, he just kind of goes, all right, let's just make the best of it. If I die here, fine. I'm going to still do science here. I'm going to do what I was going to do anyways. Let's just see what happens. So the whole stranded psychology gets really interested in different space movies too. Most of it's sheer panic and chaos. But The Martian actually brings about a whole different side of that stranded psychology. The rescue repair mission is certainly the more common trope of cinema. Certainly The Martian again. Mars Needs Moms. It's a direct to DVD sci-fi one, but it's actually pretty cute. Doom. Yeah, it gets a little interesting as well. But it's either you're again, you're stranded. It's still that stranded psychology, but instead of just going complete chaos, what are we going to do? It's more of a, okay, comms are still up. We can still communicate. How do we get ourselves out of this? How do we repair certain rovers or spaceships or communications? What are we going to do and get back home? Hopefully. The first trip / traveling got interesting, so it's no longer dealing with, okay, we're going to send a rocket, we're going to send people to Mars, yippee. But these particular movies go through the steps, go through the training. They go through, okay, what do we need to actually plan a trip to Mars? What kind of specialists do we need on Mars? Now, whether they got the specialists correct is a whole different scenario, but that goes with most space movies that I have a problem with. John Carter, an interesting Disney film, is based off of a Princess from Mars book, actually. So it is the retelling of it, but through the main character, John Carter. So I do recommend that movie as well. Red Planet is a good movie as well. Life Comes Here, I have to say, Mars Attacks. This is the best, craziest movie of life coming here, specifically from Mars. I do not recommend it for kids, by the way, so just keep that in mind. But if you're really looking for a horribly cheesy sci-fi Mars-related movie, I highly recommend Mars Attacks. And John Carter as well. And then we mess with life. We mess with something that we have no understanding of. So let's see what happens. So Doom is probably the best example of that. I would love to put in the movie Alien, but it's not Mars related. But Alien is certainly the best prime example of we messing with life. Don't touch anything. But in this case, there are Martian remains, and then it just kind of infected everybody in a research facility. So, oh well. Don't touch anything, don't lick anything, just don't do anything. But what I really want to touch base on is the movie The Martian. As you can tell, it went through several different categories. So The Martian, through NASA specifically, has said The Martian is actually one of the more modern, scientifically accurate space movies to this time. So it's really interesting. It is based off of a book by Andy Weir. I highly recommend reading the book and then see the movie. They're actually very similar. The movie did really well to follow the book, but the book goes more into the technology of it. It goes through the math and engineering of what's going on, and how did Mark Watney, the main character here, survives through his time, and it goes through his thought process. So I really do highly recommend the book. So it's set in the year 2035. Main premise, you have a group of astronauts going to Mars. They're like, okay, it's another trip to Mars, la-di-da, okay, we have some biologists, we have some engineers, we have some geologists, let's just do some experiments and head back home. Okay, not too bad, all right. Except then you have a giant dust storm just come right on in, and it strands one of the astronauts who they presumed dead. He wakes up, he realizes he's stranded, and he tries to survive. He tries to plant stuff, and then get communications back up and tell everybody, I'm still here, come rescue me. So I want to go through some of the main facts through this movie. This is outstanding. They got the orbital mechanics correctly. A lot of movies, you're like, come on everybody, let's go to Mars. 2 hours later, we're on Mars. It doesn't work like that at all. It takes 8 months, one way, at top speed, to get to Mars. So, luckily in this particular movie, they had a satellite in between to actually as almost like a way station. They would get to that particular station, get as much supplies as they can, and then go to Mars and then back. So they did actually have that, and that's what we want to try with the moon, actually. We want to try that with Mars eventually, but we'd like to have the moon as a nice little stopping gas station point, if you will. So they did actually get the orbital mechanics right as far as time goes, as far as trying to get to Mars, how to get back, went through all the physics. So ESA is the European Space Agency. They were consultants for all of this. It was fantastic. Finally, bring in scientists for your consultants. It's not that hard. Gravity got a little interesting, though. That indeed was at least a point or two off of the scoring of a perfect score. So they did actually design the spacesuits as best as possible, at least out of the Apollo program. So the spacesuit is still in our standards fairly old design. So the problem is that the walking on the surface, most of the movie you just have Matt Damon just kind of going, I'm on Mars, la-dee-da. The problem is that the pressure, the surface pressure on Mars, we have no idea how people are going to walk on Mars. And unfortunately, our only means of how do people walk in space is from the Apollo program of people on the moon, in which case they're bouncing around. Are you going to watch a deep, hardcore sci-fi movie where your main character is going to bounce up and down and take them seriously? No. So for now, we have no idea how people are supposed to walk on the surface of Mars. What may end up happening, because the surface of Mars can get a little tricky as far as surface pressure goes and for sand, is that there may actually have to be weighted boots. And if, in that case, if there's weighted boots and your spacesuit is already making you like the Marshmallow Man, you actually have to swing your gait around a little bit. In which case, no one's going to take anybody seriously if your main character's walking around like that. No siree. So that at least was like, okay, that's probably wrong, but since we don't know ahead of time, we're not going to really dock off a lot of points for you. Okay. Radiation trouble. They didn't really get much into this particular scenario in the movie. In the book, it touches on it just a little tiny bit, but in reality, it's actually a huge problem. This is one of the main reasons why we haven't sent anybody to Mars yet. It's fine to send people to the moon because it only takes a couple hours to then put someone on the moon, they get back in their capsule, back home they go. Okay, but if you're in space for 8 months one way, then land on a planet with no atmosphere, with a whole bunch of more radiation, and then come back for another 8 months, that's a lot of radiation. A lot of radiation. So our recent discovery, and actually more results are supposed to be posted fairly soon. But has anybody heard of the twin experiment with the ISS? Yes, absolutely. So you would have two twin brothers, Mark and Scott. One would stay here on Earth. One went up to the International Space Station for a whole year. They would try to eat the same. They would try to do similar exercises. They would try to do similar activities. But they would pretty much monitor how would two identical twins be then different when that one twin from space would come back. And it's astounding because the main problem was radiation. He got so much radiation from just 1 year in space was the equivalent of having 10 full-body CAT scans per day. That's how much radiation he got. His skin couldn't retain water for weeks. His skin couldn't retain water for several weeks, so he got immediately sunburned as soon as he landed back on Earth. So his skin could no longer keep himself hydrated. And he was bald, so that didn't help his scalp either. And there just list of just like, oh boy, lots of stuff went bodily wrong. But the main issue is radiation. And he was just in the International Space Station. He did a few spacewalks and that was fine. But that's as best of protection as we can get for someone who was in space for an entire year and he still got that much radiation. So now to be on a planet for in the book and certainly in the movie, he was there for quite a long time, just kind of like, oh, look, I'm on Mars. It's like, no, you're getting blasted with radiation. We're lucky enough to not get as much radiation here on Earth. At worst, you get a sunburn. But that's because you get UV radiation. You get sun radiation just kind of clawing its way through the atmosphere. You get a sunburn. But what's worse, what's great about our atmosphere is that we don't get X-rays and gamma rays from the sun just blasting us. If we did, we have way worse than a sunburn to worry about. But luckily, we have a beautiful atmosphere. We have atmosphere and atmosphere and atmosphere and layers and layers and layers, where those X-rays and gamma rays will just go boing right off back into space. Mars does not have an atmosphere, so welcome all the radiation it can get. Now, this one was mainly for the Mars geologists in the movie theater that were very nitpicky. We were very nitpicky with this. So, in the book and in the movie, the Ares 4, which carried the astronauts and landed on Mars, was in Schiaparelli crater. So, the geology of that particular crater, however, is not necessarily a good place to land. So that's kind of confusing for us geologists going, why would you land there? There's too much thermal change, so your circuits would actually not act properly to extreme cold to extreme heat. There's dusty rock beds, so it's way too risky to even land anything and hope you don't puncture something, especially if you have a rover. You're going to puncture a wheel. That's not good. Too much dust and so much pitted texture. So this is actually what our landing site looked like, is that you have too many ridges. This is not flat enough to just land and then just walk around willy-nilly kind of thing. No, this is actually quite a bad landing point of view going, no, there's way cooler landing sites on Mars you could have picked. But the main thing that really got all the Martian people going, no, was the windstorms. Now here's the thing. The windstorm is the main drive of the entire plot of the book and the movie. So if you didn't have the windstorm, you wouldn't have a book or a movie. Fine, we get that, okay. Except, when you have a windstorm in the movie and in the book, it's this huge global dust storm that's rising up, and there's lightning, and it's rolling over the hill, and it's coming right at them, and pieces of shrapnel are being picked up and pretty much can stab through some of the spacesuits and even through human skin, which you only need a pound for to penetrate human skin. So they made it sound like, oh my goodness, this is like 100+ mile per hour wind. This is gale force winds on the surface of Mars. Oh my goodness. Well, to a Martian, that is true. To a Martian, it can be 100 miles per hour wind. But whenever we think of 100 mile per hour wind, we're thinking gale force winds. So think about the surface pressure on Mars. Mars is not like Earth. So actually, 100 mile per hour winds on Earth is actually only 11 miles per hour on Mars. Much lighter, not enough to pick up huge pieces of shrapnel and pretty much just javelin humans. No. But again, if you didn't have the windstorm, you wouldn't have the plot to trap Mark Watney onto the surface of Mars and have him stranded and trying to get back home. But there are huge global dust storms. Can last up to 3 months. Some of them have lasted at least up to 5 months. Like I said, they completely block out the sun, so that's going to be an issue for future astronauts as well. You really hope you have enough battery life to get you through that and not just rely on solar cells. You will be in complete darkness. What's also worse, it's not as easy going, oh, it's just a little dust, I'll just wipe it off. No. This sand on Mars is so tiny, it can cling to you. So not only do you have statically charged dust sticking onto you, which can actually clog up your instruments, it can clog up your oxygen supply, it can clog up your face mask, it can clog up all the little wrinkles in your spacesuit, which is an issue in itself, and even your helmet, it can clog up everything. Sand gets everywhere, yay! But you can't breathe it in. So it's not as easy as going, oh, you're at the beach and there's sand, okay, fine, whatever. No, the sand on Mars actually has tiny shards of glass in it. So you do not want to breathe that in and get all that glass stuck in your lungs. Now, why there's glass is because of all the volcanoes. There's a lot of destructive volcanoes, luckily asleep or dead, so they're no longer erupting, as we know. But you still have a lot of that volcanic glass over the years and years and years on Mars, so that glass is everywhere. So having these kind of powerful windstorms pretty much crop up every, I believe, like four to 6 years. We're still trying to learn about the seasonal cycle of some of these windstorms, but they spawn. It's really creepy. They spawn from Hellas Basin. So Hellas Basin is one of the larger impact craters near the south part of Mars. And there's a huge sand pile in the middle of this crater. So what happens is that it's almost like how tornadoes form here. You get a mix of cold air and warm air mixed together, you get a tornado. Same thing happens on Mars. You get that warm air and cold air, you meet, you get a sand tornado, fine. But when you get it in a nice, big, shallow bowl of sand, then you get another tornado, and another tornado, and another tornado, and another tornado. It picks up so much sand, it actually crawls out of the crater, and then it brings up all the sand and covers the whole planet. It's really creepy to see, but it's awesome. That's just my Martianness coming out. So this is pretty much what a global dust storm can look like. From June, it looks very pretty. This would actually be considered autumn, going into winter time on Mars. You would get like the polar caps, a really pretty geology, all that fun stuff. And global dust storm, you just get complete coverage. And this is actually the beginning of a storm, though. So this was captured by Hubble. So it can get pretty dangerous. So do we still want to send people to Mars? Maybe. We just need to be careful about that. So this is what a dust devil would look like. This particular one is up to 50 miles tall, by the way. And this is considered a small one. So really, really tiny, really pretty. You can see the shadow as it drifts along. You can get geologies where you can see a whole bunch of tracks that they leave behind, which I have a picture later to show you guys. So back to the Martian movie and book, and then our understanding of what we're trying to do. We're still actually trying to learn, can we grow stuff on Mars? Okay, the book really went into the biology and chemistry. Is that possible? And turns out it kind of can, a little bit. So in the movie, you have a lot of potato growing. Okay, he got his starches and his sugars, that's fine. But we do actually have a whole branch in NASA called the Astrobiology program. So one of its functions is to figure out, can we survive and grow stuff on Mars? So we use JSC Mars 1A, which is a very popular, what we call simulant. So this is made usually out of Texas and California. There are labs that specialize how to make the exact composition as close as possible to Mars. And then they would distribute it to labs and see, do something with this. Can you grow something in this simulant? Can you do experiments with the simulant? We have some of these jars in our Mars lab here at the university. This is very, very as close as possible to Mars thanks to the rovers. Now that the rovers have lasered as much as they can around the soil, we have a pretty good idea of how to make at least a good replica of Mars, at least by sand and soil and dirt. But then there's an opposite problem. Okay, we go to Mars, we plant some plants. Okay, can we really protectively do that? So this branch started very recently, 2016. This is the Planetary Protection branch. So it's technically under the Astrobiology branch, but it's actually becoming its own shtick. It's now become the bane of any mission now, whether it's to the moon, to Mars, to Europa, to icy moons and icy bodies. If we want to land on something, we have to be as clean as possible. Because if we were to sneeze on something and land it on Mars or the moon, and there happens to be bacteria there, we could have just wiped out that whole bacteria and not even realize it by our snot. So the whole reason for this is, okay, don't touch the water on Mars. We know there's water on Mars now. Hooray, it's on the subsurface, but don't just go up to it and go poke. No, make sure you are completely clean and allowed to do so. So we want to study the water so bad on Mars, but we can't do anything about it until these guys give us the okay go, green light. And then communications. The book and the movie actually do this really, really well. A lot of movies up till recently was like, hey Houston, what's up? And it's like an immediate, almost like text message fast back and forth. In reality, it's not. It really isn't. You're that far away from any kind of satellite. You can use satellites to bounce off your signal and whatnot. Well, that you can. But there's always going to be that time delay, whether it's orbiter cameras, especially in the movie and book. Mark Watney uses lander cameras to take pictures of him going, I'm alive, selfie, kind of deal. But there's still that time delay to download that data, to then uplink it, bounce it across a few satellites, for then someone at NASA to downlink it. It takes a while. And you can, especially in the movie does it really well. You can feel almost the slowness of just like, download the data, please, right now. You can feel the slowness of it, and it is a very good portrayal of, it's not just like, hey guys, I'm alive. Nope, have to take several hours to even get that message. So, in complete briefness here, what we know about Mars. There is an atmosphere, it's really, really thin. What we call it is tenuous, which means it's not just a nice, pretty, full atmosphere. It comes and goes. There are some clouds here and there. Very thin. There's metal particles, so you really wouldn't want to breathe it anyways. The surface is gorgeous. I had a really hard time picking just one image for this slide. But I really like the stratigraphy of this particular setting here. So there are thousands of images completely free to the public. This is part of the high-rise image set, by the way. This was just a small portion of a much larger panorama, by the way. This is how far you can zoom in more and more and more to look at all the really cool knobs and lines of the geology. So really, really pretty. Yeah, this is the image I wanted to show you guys. So this is a very famous dune field. All of these black streaks all over the place. We call this the Etch-a-Sketch region on Mars. Anybody remember what an Etch-a-Sketch is? Or did I date myself? Oh, good. Okay, you guys know what an Etch-a-Sketch is. I say that to some of my students, and they're looking at me like, what's an Etch-a-Sketch? It's like, okay. You say that to little kids, too. It's like, but all of these are dust devil tracks. So little miniature dust tornadoes would just kind of rip through the surface, usually around dune fields, and it would leave behind these tracks. And then they would disappear, usually in the fall and winter. There's usually not a lot of wind activity around the fall and winter seasons. And then they'll just crop right back up. They have a specific seasonal time when you have all these little tiny dust tornadoes just completely ripping and roaring through it. Makes us geologists crazy because you could barely see the beautiful dune field behind it. But then all the wind and dust people who study that on Mars are like, oh, look how cool that is and all the cool patterns. And we're like, So this is Olympus Mons, which I keep referring to. So this is the largest volcano in our whole solar system. So it's a gorgeous, gorgeous volcano. And you can see all the cool little pits going on here. So why it's not a nice round circle like most volcanoes we see here on Earth is because these are actually multiple vents. This guy actually exploded several times. So make a new vent every time. And I believe the current count of what we estimate it to be is like 8. So it erupted massively 8 different times in its history. Whether we figure it's actually fully asleep or it's completely dead, we don't know. We hope it's dead. Really cool ice formations that can be formed on Mars. This is the only place in the entire solar system that this happens, actually. We can't find this on Earth. We don't know how to recreate it in the lab whatsoever, but it's only found in a small section of the south pole of Mars. We call this Swiss cheese terrain, because we have nothing else to compare it to. We have nothing else to even name it. It's just a bunch of random squiggly holes. But it takes up at least a good section of the south pole of Mars. We can't find it anywhere else. Not any of the icy moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Nowhere. So, really cool terrain. Water, yes, absolutely. There is evidence for past water on the surface. So our understanding of gully systems. We use Earth as our own playground. You have a lot of Mars people going to Hawaii and Iceland. Hawaii and Iceland are actually the best two places on Earth that can actually really recreate some of the geology on Mars that we see, especially the gully systems, a lot of the glaciers out of Iceland, a lot of the volcanic systems out of Hawaii match that of some of the Martian volcanoes, except Olympus Mons, but that's to go without saying. Another really beautiful gully system, so you can see some of these are still active. That's the beauty part about the high-resolution camera. It's still ongoing, and it's been going on for several years now. So if these are still active, we would see tiny little changes actually going on, and we have, especially gully systems where we would see these channels just keep growing and growing and growing, and all of this fan material just kind of spread out. So we certainly have ongoing missions. We have the ExoMars. ExoMars is this orbiter here. It was supposed to have a lander. That lander's dead now. But it's going to have a rover. It will land soon-ish. I believe they keep pushing out the time, though, so I don't remember the official time for the rover. But lander is dead. Orbiter is still going around, though. So this is the European Space Agency version of orbiter and rover. The InSight lander right here is our first seismometer. We don't know what the inside of Mars looks like. We just assume it's like Earth, with a core, a mantle, and a crust. But in reality, that's not what Mercury looks like. That's not what Venus looks like. Why would we expect Mars to look like that too? So we have a seismometer, at least online. It's operational. It's still digging the hole. Now we call it the mole. To dig at least a 50-meter hole down, and we're going to induce Mars quakes. So we're going to just send out vibrations, and whenever those vibrations bounce back, we'll then get to see what kind of layers are in the subsurface. And maybe there's a core. We know there has to be a core for a rocky planet, but how big is it? What is it made out of? Is it spherical? We don't know. It could be football shaped for all we know. We don't know. The Mars 2020 rover, this thing is massive, absolutely massive. So the Curiosity rover is the size of a small car, as I said. This is going to be an SUV, all right? Still bigger, much more instruments. This time it's also an international collaboration, so we have, oh goodness, where is it? Yeah, definitely a lot of the European nations coming on for this. Where's my favorite? Here we go. So we have the Sherlock sensors, and there's actually a small counterpart here called Watson. So, yay, European Space Agency, thank you for that. Lovely deal. But the tires are going to be much thicker than Curiosity's. Curiosity rover wheels, we were starting to be a little bit skimpy on the funding for that. We're like, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. We made them too thin, and now they're ripping apart like paper. It's awful. So the tires for these, spare no expense here. We're going to do this correctly this time for Mars 2020. So the Mars 2020 rover, we finally picked a landing site. Out of over 800 landing sites on Mars, can you imagine the conferences and telecons that went through that? Because I can, and it was a nightmare. So 800 landing sites on Mars, which is basically the entirety of Mars. Pick a place anywhere. To then it went down to 80. 80 landing sites for at least a year and a half. And then it got down to 3. since at least last February. So finally 3 landing sites. And so everybody was just like, oh my goodness, which one's gonna win? All the betting pools were up and about and whatnot. We finally picked a landing site just a couple months ago, and it's gorgeous. This is Jezero Crater. So gorgeous, gorgeous crater. It's supposed to land around this side of the crater, but the size of the crater is actually fairly large. Scale bar. But notice the different colorations though. So obviously this is a black and white image, but knowing how dark it is on this side versus how light it is. What's interesting about the history of this crater is that it actually went through 2 different special periods that happened on Mars. The first one being the volcanic period. So all this dark, rusty stuff is actually a bit of a spilling of volcanic ash into the crater. So this part of the crater still has a lot of the volcanic stuff going on. Now the lighter stuff going here and spilling through here is actually a second different period on Mars, which we call the Network Valley period, or Network Valley era as well. So what happens is that you're not only dealing with fire, you're dealing with ice. So this is pretty much the Game of Thrones haven of a crater for us Martians. But the real deal of why I picked this crater is this guy right here. This is a delta fan. So you would have all of the past ancient water cutting right through the rock, right through the rim of the crater, and just completely spilling out. So there might be some microfossils. There might be some microbacteria fossils hidden, buried into this delta. And if there's not, fine. That's just check it off our to-do list of, is it there on Mars or is it not? But it's a gorgeous delta fan. It's beautifully preserved. However, it did get hit by a crater perfectly in the middle. But the rover is supposed to land near this fan and then just start poking it and lasering it slowly, carefully, of course. Thank you, planetary protection, all of a sudden. So there's a lot we don't know. I can pretty much go on for an entire another hour of what we still don't know about Mars, but I'm not gonna do that. So hopefully the Mars 2020 rover will help alleviate a lot of the mysteries that we still have about Mars. Hopefully movies and certainly books. The latest book, like I said, was The Martian by Andy Weir. There hasn't really been much more push to involve Mars in literature anymore. Not really much of a push to include Mars in cinema much anymore as well. But hopefully we will, and hopefully maybe our understanding will help build upon more of that fiction imagination with us as well. But that's all I have for you guys tonight, so thank you guys so much for coming here. Yay. Now I'll be happy to answer any questions you guys may have. I have it on my phone because I forgot to type it out. So just see me after this and I'll write it out for you. Yeah.
What information does it have on it?
It's how to get the images from HiRise. So it will bring you up to a nice pretty web page, and you can just explore all the images. They're all JPEGs, so it's not like you need a special software to download the images. Nope, they're all JPEGs. They're all very pretty. There is a new tab on the website, though, that if you happen to have 3D glasses around just lying about, they're starting to have some of those high-res images, high-resolution images to be 3D. So you could just wear a regular pair of 3D glasses right on your computer screen, and it's really trippy. It's really fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So that seismograph rover, you know the one,
Yep.
the 50-meter one.
Yep.
Where's it going to get all the energy to perturb the crust or whatever with that much to get good images?
Yeah. So that's the fun part about seismographs. You don't really have to rely on any cameras or anything. It does have a camera to make sure it landed all right. So there is a panoramic camera around and make sure that this part deployed all right. So all of this is luckily is already set up. So this is where the drill would be. So what happens is that this is also solar panel with a touch of, I don't think it's plutonium, might be plutonium. But there is a little bit of nuclear going on to bring in that huge pulse, because to dig down that deep, yeah, you are going to need quite a bit of energy to just send out pulses. But receiving signals back is not that hard. We have actually tested a lot of the drill systems out in Antarctica. So we know how to drill deep and in several different layers, at least of ice, maybe a little bit of dust too. But it's going a little slower than they expected, unfortunately. But they don't know why. The theory going on right now currently is because they didn't realize how compact the sand is. So they're actually going a little bit slower to make sure the drill doesn't break, which is perfectly understandable. All right. Any other questions? You have a I'm not sure if this presentation will be posted on the library website. Oh, she's giving me a thumbs up. All right. So if anything, you can rewatch this presentation and all of my wackiness and just pause. Otherwise, most of it was from IMDb, the Internet Movie Database. You can just type in the word Mars. But most of these books and movies I have personally either read or seen, so it was just kind of like, oh yeah, definitely need to include that movie and stuff. So yeah, there are quite a few films to definitely check out, even if they're just completely wacky. They're very, very fun, especially the 1950s and 1960s one. Then you're like, oh boy, yeah, haven't we come a long way from cinema? Great. Yeah.
Information, I cannot take pictures.
Oh, yep.
Business card,
I could also do that.
I'll write that. Thank you.
Yeah. I also have a business card too with my email. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What does that thing at the end mean? Keep calm and something?
Klaatu Barada Nikto. Anybody remember what film that's from? Day the Earth Stood Still. Absolutely. So that was the secret code for rescue.
Oh.
Klaatu Barada
Please
Nikto.
rescue us.
At least the main character. It was just pretty much like keep her safe. Alrighty. Well, thank you guys so much. If you guys have any other questions, I'm up here. I have a weekly blog that just talks about random space stuff every Monday, and then my radio show is also random space stuff on a weekly basis. So lots of fun space stuff. This is also now in an archive, so you can just listen to previous episodes and whatnot. So, all right, thank you guys for coming.